There you go. So let's go ahead and get started. I'm Stephen McCord, part of the Calms gang leadership and all, and I help organize these webinars. So Christine, who's going to present today, is in a long line of illustrious presenters, maybe even then probably some others on the call too. So thanks everybody for joining all that. What I have up on the screen just to get us started is the next conference. We'll send out an email announcement soon about it, but you can put the dates in your calendar at the beginning of October. It's October 1 to 3. The first day would be like some workshops. The second day, all sort of in meeting rooms, presentation sort of thing, and the third day, some kind of field trip. That's the current thinking. So get that on your calendars. And then there's something else that's going to show. Oh, yeah. This is here's the webinar. I was thinking, yeah, I thought we had another. We may not have another one lined up. This might be the last one. We might do another one next month. We'll see. But this is the last one that's on that we've got for sure for right now. Let me unpresent that. A couple of house cleaning things, or just housekeeping rather. Although you can clean up too. People already have. I turn off video and make sure you're on mute. You can unmute yourselves, but best to be on mute for now. And then so you're not interrupting anything. There is a little chat feature. You look on your window in the lower right, probably. There's a little chat icon, and you can go in there. I'll send something right now. Testing. So maybe you saw a little pop up or something for messages. So feel free to do that. And I'll be monitoring the chat window. So if there's anything urgent, you could put in there or raise your hand. Try not to interrupt. And then when Christine's done presenting, there'll be time for a Q&A. So you can go ahead and put your questions in there, and then we can carry on until at least 1 o'clock. So with that, let me introduce Christine Perisic. Her work ranges from local scale trophic dynamics to global scale patterns in lake distributions. She's interested in the mechanisms that govern lake food web structure and function across mountain landscapes and reservoirs, and in understanding limnology patterns occurring across those scales. Currently, she's exploring the abundance, distribution, and vulnerability of mountain lake ecosystems across the U.S. She's examining the food web ecology of the mountain lake ecosystems in the Sierras, investigating the effects of mega-wildfires on these lake communities and their food webs. She's also, you might see her name if you're part of the California Water Blog. She's the managing editor of that. And if you're not part of it, then you should be, because it's a great weekly resource, useful information about what's going on in the world of water in California. So it's California Water Blog. And with that, I'll turn it over to you, Christine.
Great, thank you. Let me. Go.
Yep, that did it.
All right, great. That's the full presentation view for you.
Yep.
Perfect. Okay. Well, great. Well, thanks for that really nice introduction. Like was said, I'm Christine Perisic. I'm a community ecologist and landscape limnologist. I do research on food webs, freshwater systems like lakes and reservoirs, and I dabble a little bit in fish ecology. I'm currently a postdoctoral research scholar at the Center for Watershed Sciences at UC Davis. And the work I'm going to be talking about today is related to food webs before and after a fire, and that work is preliminary. And it's really a story of sometimes how like science just happens. So I was sampling mountain lake food webs for a different project for my PhD dissertation over the course of several years. And that work led me to sample in different regions across the Sierra Nevada, where I would basically try to sample as many lakes as I could during the lake ice-off season, which for the Sierra Mountain lakes is summer. And that's when the 2021 Dixie Fire ignited and swept across some of my project sites. And that was a major disturbance to the area, to the people, and to those ecosystems. And that's, after some time had passed, my team realized like that we were being presented with an opportunity to do something really different here, because it was science that couldn't be done before, because there has never been pre-fire food web data to be able to do it, because it was a chance event. So we found ourselves in a position of having those data, and we sat down and wrote a proposal to the National Science Foundation. They have a rapid program where they'll fund work kind of like this at a quicker rate than other or a quicker pace than other regular standard proposals, because something, a event happened and you need to quickly get out there and collect some data. So we applied for that and we got it. And so we were fortunate to be able to go back to the sites and collect some post-fire data. Now, to be able to explain well the methods and motivations behind the analyses of that firework, I'm actually going to back up a little bit and talk about the system in general and the questions that we were asking originally, because they tie into the firework, and those were forming the basis of the NSF Rapid that we applied for in order to accomplish that fire science. So the primary goal of the food web, of the pre-fire study on those burned lakes and the others I visited over the years, is whether the length of the lake's food chain, its food web complexity, and fish's reliance on certain resources in the lake is varying with the size of the ecosystem and how productive it is. So food chain length can impact community structure, ecosystem processes, contamination concentrations, resource availability, as well as resource stability. And like shorter food chains are in a way more energetically efficient. Classically, Post et al. In 2000 showed how food chain length in these large New York lakes that they were studying was shaped by ecosystem size. And the authors looked at ecosystem size, productivity, and trophic position of the fish, which is sort of like how high up in the food chain those fish are. And they found that as the lake got bigger, the food chain got longer. And these New York lakes, as those lakes got bigger, they had additions of like lake trout and even bigger lake trout, and they're apex predators, and they have a massive effect on the trophic positions happening in the lake. On the other hand, if you're working in smaller mountain lakes, you might go from a lake having brook trout to a lake having rainbow trout, but the trophic diversity between the two systems doesn't change as much. And normally you're only getting 1 to 2 fish species in a lake to begin with for mountain lakes. And so it might take a rare large system like Lake Tahoe for that relationship that the Post study found to appear. And so the reason I find that important is that food chain length can impact a plethora of community and ecosystem dynamics, like I mentioned, community structure and ecosystem processes, contamination concentrations as they're moving up in the food web, and that resource availability and stability within the system. So it would be valuable to know how this classic theory in limnology is holding up in oligotrophic, generally nutrient-poor mountain lakes. And this Post study, which is a very highly cited study, has been really popular in people trying to test these general questions, but under different conditions. Do these results always hold up? And if they don't, then what cases don't they? To better understand how to manage the lake systems. So people have tried to recreate it with varying results. And in addition, there are now new metrics of food web complexity aside from food chain length alone that could be interesting to look at. And that's also what we were trying to do. So this, as well as these different gradients, have never been tried on mountain lakes. So the goals of this work was to sample food webs from 36 lakes in California in the mountains, and we were looking at the two competing hypotheses in that study: the whether it's food web complexity, or sorry, whether ecosystem size or the productive space in that lake is the thing that is determining food web complexity. And then we were also trying to quantify that fish consumer reliance on different food resources in the lake and how that changes on a lake size gradient. So the lakes in the study range from 8,000 to almost 4 million meters cubed in volume. So the methods, which are very similar to the ones that were for the firework, because we were trying to replicate the study, basically each summer I'd backpack with a team of 2 to 3 people to collect food web data. We were each carrying about 65 to 75 pounds per person, which is a lot. We were sort of the opposite of minimalist backpackers. But in addition to personal gear like food and tents and warm layers, we also needed to bring field gear with us, like 30 pounds of dry ice that can last about 4 days in the mountains, to be able to put the samples on in the field. So things that we were doing out there, we did things like depth sounding the lakes to make bathymetric map estimates. We took YSI measurements in the lake from the center. We were collecting bits of tissue from anything living in the lake. So that included like setting nets for fish, collecting zooplankton, macroinvertebrates, aquatic plants and algae, also particulate organic matter, and even riparian plants and invertebrates that were along the shoreline that could presumably fall into the lake or have an impact on the system. So these samples were kept on dry ice in the field and stored that way until they could be put into the lab freezer back at UC Davis. And then once we were in the lab, we did a whole range of sample processing, from fish dissections to zooplankton sorting, insect and plant identification. And we were doing all of those things before we could finally, our last step, rinse the samples, dry them, and grind them up into powder. And then we transferred that material into small tin capsules that we then sent to the stable isotope facility for carbon and nitrogen solids analysis. So I'll breeze over this slide since I'm just providing context for the original study before getting to the next one, whose methods are just a teeny bit different. But I performed linear mixed effect models to test those two competing hypotheses and analyze the stable isotope data to understand food web complexity and fish resource reliance, which is something that we're planning to do for the Fryer work as well. So here's a photo of fish tissue in little vials up at the top. And they're being transferred into the trays next to them, and those will go into the drying oven, and then that material will be ground. They'll be ground and then put into small capsules that need to fit into one of the wells of this tray pictured below. What's visually interesting here is that you can see differences in rainbow trout tissue color from a small lake on the left versus a large lake on the right. And that's just suggesting that they are eating different things that are providing different amino acids. And so whatever they're eating from their respective lakes is different. So just visually, that's an interesting observation. And so this is a stable isotope food web biplot, plotting the data that came back from the stable isotope facility. And that's looking at carbon on the x-axis and nitrogen on the y-axis. And these are for different components of the food web. So you've got your fish in blue, aquatic insects in pink, there's zooplankton, different aquatic plants, whether they're emerged, submerged, or algae, and also some lake sediment. The error bars here are representing the standard deviation of each of those food web components. For the left, it's the small lake, and for the right, it's a large lake. And that shaded area is one of the measures of food web complexity that we're looking at. So in this case, is diet diversity, or like how big that food web is in space. And I'm showing this figure from the previous work in its simpler form of a small and large lake, mainly to explain the kinds of relationships that you can see using food web stable isotopes. The small and large lake were incidentally from Lassen, which is the area that got burned, and I'll be talking about later. And I did this for all the lakes that I visited, including the burned sites, which I'll get to in a moment. And so basically for this food web metric, you're kind of just connecting the dots and showing how much space that food web's sort of taking up. This is another key type of result that the food web analysis can tell us. It's being able to tell the proportion of fish consumer diet that these different food sources are contributing to. So this is an analysis that we didn't don't yet have everything we need to for the firework to be able to do, but we're getting very close. But we can do something like this to look at some similar questions, but in the fire context. So I do want to linger here and explain what is going on and what we're going to be able to learn from like a plot like this. So these are the results of from generalized additive mixed effect models. And on the left plot, the x-axis has 6 different food resources. And on the y-axis, it's showing the proportion of diet reliance for the fish. And from this, we can see that aquatic and terrestrial insects are dominating the sourcing or the fish's diet. And on the right plot, we're looking at how those patterns on the left are changing along that lake size gradient. So particularly interesting trends are how there is an increasing reliance on terrestrial insects, that hot pink color, as the lake is getting larger. And then there's a decreasing reliance on aquatic plant vegetation as the lakes get larger, and that's the green bar. And so this is something that we would like to do for the firework, but also looking at burn severity and how volume of the lake might be playing a role into that and how that was changing pre-fire and post-fire. Now, there are a couple of different ways to look at fire. In a black and white world, it's either good or it's bad. And people want to know the good or the bad repercussions of fires on the landscape. In truth, it could be both, and it could depend on the fire and where it burned, and the type of material that was burning and how severe it was. This is a hot area of research in California right now, pun intended. And now we know that fire is natural and healthy on the landscape. It's necessary, it's good. And fire also is part of the evolutionary ecology of native species in California. But then the management of forests have changed, and now we're getting really bad and increasingly common mega-fires. And so my team is approaching our studies questions from that perspective, from a mega disturbance context. So we're using our opportunity with pre-fire data to answer questions about fire effects on lakes that couldn't be addressed before because those data didn't exist. I mentioned that the Dixie Fire took place in 2021. Here up on the top panel is a picture of Lake Almanor, which is in the Lassen area, and it was burned in the fire in 2021. And this is a picture taken in 2022 overlooking Lake Almanor. And I've actually just been taking pictures from the spot every year to see how the forest has been changing. So there has been a surge in climate-driven wildfires across the Pacific West of North America, and 7 of the largest California wildfires we know have occurred in the last 6 years. So they're becoming increasingly common. And these megafires have been causing some unprecedented disturbances on ecosystems, but we don't fully understand what all of those are and how those are all linked together. Increasingly, this is what it looks like doing summer backpacking work in the Sierra Nevada. On the left is the Lassen National Forest in 2020. It was taken, the top and the bottom photo were taken about 12 hours apart, so one in the evening and one in the morning. And on the right is similarly the Plumas National Forest in 2021, and that's where I was when the Dixie Fire was going through Lassen and created the photo at the bottom on the right. So these smoke impacts are shortening our window for our field season. For one thing, we can't be out there if the smoke severity is too strong. And then also we don't have service, so we don't know if the fire is close or if it's just the wind bringing smoke into the area. A unique thing about this work is that there are no pre and post fire lake studies for food webs. This paper is a research review paper that's sort of trying to understand the fire effects on lakes and do lakes feel the burn. And there's a lot, there's more work that has been done on streams for some reason than on lakes. And so we really don't understand what's what's going to happen in the lakes from abiotic processes and biotic processes. And so instead, studies tend to focus on post-fire with unburned reference sites, because that's all the chance that you have to kind of try to be able to answer those questions typically. So little is known about how lakes are going to respond to fire in general, and we're hoping to help piece that together. So here is Emerald Lake, which is one of the burned lakes in our fire study, pre-fire on the top and post-fire on the bottom. And you can see how that affected the ecology around the lake. It's pretty sad. Typically on a healthy landscape in the top panel, you'll see like when there are rains, the leaf litter is able to hold on to some of that, and it gets absorbed into the ground and is able to recharge the groundwater. And that's a healthy landscape. Once you have ash on the landscape, though, after a fire, and then it's followed by rains, especially, the ash is shielding and preventing that recharge. So a lot of the organic, burned organic material ends up getting mobilized and pushed into the lakes, and it's not really able to recharge the groundwater. Having that organic matter mobilized and pushed into the lakes is then going to reduce water clarity in the lake, boost nutrient concentrations in that lake. It will shorten water residence time in proportion to lake size and increase the biological oxygen demand in the lake too, which might create anoxic conditions in the lake. So fire size does not equal severity, but in this case, the Dixie Fire was both large and quite severe too. It was the largest single source wildfire in California on historical record. And it burned about 70% of Lassen National Park, which unfortunately also got hit by another big fire a year or two later coming from the other side. The Dixie Fire burned from July to October 2021, and it wasn't deemed as officially put out until a rare autumn storm in October came through and dumped a ton of rain in less than 48 hours. And so here's a burn map of the progression of that fire. So there are 10 lakes that we have pre-fire food web data on. They're all in the Caribou Wilderness, which is next to the Lassen National Park. And they have various, they all have various lake sizes, watershed sizes, and differences in burn severity. Some of them were burned totally to twigs, and some of them just had an understory burn. So from a distance, you can kind of see they still have, like the trees around the lake still have vegetation that's living. And so there's a potential for post-fire food web trophic cascades to have occurred in this case, which is also likely going to hinge on ecosystem size and other ecological criteria that we're hoping to tease out. And that's why I was describing those parts of it earlier in the talk. So just to orient you to the area here and how these lakes and ecosystems kind of work, these lakes are stocked with non-native fish, as in many mountain lakes, and that really structures the food web. The introduction of fish can trigger trophic cascades, which have been well documented and are shown in some clippings here. And this trophic cascade is changing how food web energy is flowing in the lake. Killing off the fish, also, like potentially from a mega disturbance, will do the same thing in a different way. And it's also going to change how food web energy flows. So adding the fish in triggered a cascade, and potentially taking them out afterwards will also trigger a big change. And so there are multiple fish species in these lakes. And today I'm mostly going to be showing rainbow trout because they were the most prevalent in each lake, and they were the most likely to trigger a trophic cascade like this. So the first question we had is whether the fishes were eradicated in these lakes following the fire. So fire and then the ash runoff that went into the lakes when it rained in October likely generated a spike in organic matter that was pushed into the lakes. Winter oxygen depletion, especially under lake ice, since this was getting close to winter, is known to scale with lake and watershed size, which could result in partial or complete fish kills. So similarly, we were hypothesizing that burn severity coupled with the effects of lake size could influence whether fish would persist in these lakes. So smaller lakes, we hypothesized, would be more likely to have fish completely eradicated, and larger lakes might be likely to have some fish persistence. Our second question is whether the strength of the trophic cascade in these lakes was linked more to ecosystem size, to burn severity, or some combination of the two. So this is a conceptual figure where the x-axis is lake volume or ecosystem size, and the y-axis is strength of that trophic cascade. And we predicted that the trophic cascade ratio would be higher in small lakes where fishes would be eradicated and lower in the large lakes that fish might persist. Finally, we want to know how the food web was restructured after the fire. So this is a biplot that I showed you earlier. And what I didn't explain is that there are two colors of shading in each plot. The blue is the original pre-fire and the data, and the teal is showing a hypothesis of if the fish were eradicated, so that blue dot, if they were taken out, then you can see how connecting those food web corners together, how that food web size might truncate. Even in a small lake versus a large lake, there's still one is still smaller than the other, but it would really truncate the food web to take out an entire like an entire level of that food web. So I already described the field methods earlier, so I won't get into that again. We basically went out again, but to the sites that had burned before, and so and we visited post-fire the following summer to be able to do all that field data collection again, and we did our best to repeat everything in the same way, particularly our catch time for fish. But I do want to give a shout out here to Paul Devine from CDFW, who's in the blue in that group photo. He really helped us out. He was navigating the fish stocking schedule with us so that we could get out there before stocking happened, because we needed to do that to be able to sample the food web that existed at that space. And he also worked with us on almost half the lakes in 2022, which was a big help. So for our methods and analyses, our first question was whether the fish were eradicated. We basically went back and we were trying to see whether our catch per unit effort changed and whether we were even able to catch fish. So we set fish gill nets again for the same amount of time that we had before, and we just compared catch per unit effort to see what was there. Our second question for trophic cascade strength and whether that varies with ecosystem size or burn severity, our plan is to look at response ratios that quantify trophic cascade effect size. And then we'll do mixed effect models and GAMs to statistically test those ratios. And I'll get a little bit more into that later when I show you some plots. And then our last question for how the food web shifts following intense watershed burning, we're planning to look at the food web carbon and nitrogen isotopes, like I was showing you earlier. And then we've also put sensors in the lakes to look at temperature and oxygen profiles. And we're hoping to do mixing models to see how the fish's diet might have changed immediately before and immediately after the fire. So some preliminary results. So for our first question of whether the fish were eradicated in the lakes following mega wildfires, we're focusing here on rainbow trout because they were the most prevalent in all the lakes. And so we did see that the number of rainbow trout per hour decreased, sometimes by 50%, but we actually did see fish in all the lakes, with the exception of our two smaller lakes, Betty and Trail, but Betty had one fish in 2020 and Trail had, I think, nothing but brown bullhead catfish, so doesn't really count here. So they did have some fish persistence, which was interesting. Here's a plot showing sort of the same thing, average catch per unit effort on the y-axis and burn severity on the x-axis, 10 being the most severe burn, and sort of ranked. And then the subplots are showing the different species that we found in the lake. So sometimes we only found brown bullhead catfish in Chitover and Trail Lake. We only found tui chub in Turnaround and Black Lake. We found trout in most of the sites. And then we found dace in about half of them. And so in all cases, we found a reduction in our catch, but we were able to find some persistence. Kind of going off of that is we were also looking at the mean rainbow trout total length to see how their growth might have changed before and after. And so we saw that 4 lakes had the total length of the rainbow trout decline or at least remain constant after the fire, or consistent rather. But 2 lakes did see positive rainbow trout growth, which was interesting. We also looked at mean condition of the fish, and so rainbow trout condition basically is overall poor in these mountain lakes. A rule of thumb is sort of like if the condition is lower than 100, it's considered low, and all of them were below 100 even before the fire. So that didn't really change much, although condition did improve in some of the sites. For whether the trophic cascade strength varies with ecosystem size, the answer to that is still TBD. I am doing some preliminary work right now on looking at that log response ratio for looking at zooplankton before and after the fire and seeing how the abundance of those zooplankton changed. And so here's a plot on the top looking at volume with 10 on the right being for the largest lake. And then the bottom plot is looking at burn severity with 10 being the most severe burn. And the blue points and line are for Cladocera and the green is for copepods. So there's some relationship happening here that they're going to be coupled, but this alone we decided is not going to be accurate enough to adequately say what's happening with the trophic cascade strength, because there could be top down and bottom up effects that are at play that we would like to look more into before we kind of wrap up this question. We also do have some chlorophyll data, which here I'm just showing some plots I'm playing with where we have the top plot is zooplankton the zooplankton ratio on the x-axis with both plots showing the chlorophyll log ratio on the y-axis, and then that bottom plot's showing burn severity, so chlorophyll potentially not really changing before and after the fire, which is interesting. And lastly, we have looking at how the lake food web structure and function have shifted following intense watershed burning. So the answer to this is still TBD too. So these are some plots that you'd already seen just to kind of refresh your memory on this question. We did get some data just recently to be able to create these biplots for the small and large lake for all of our pre and post fire lakes, and so I can share that with you now, but this is pretty hot off the press. And so we're still working through these other analyses that I had briefly showed you as directions that we want to take this question and this project. So here we have carbon again on the x-axis with nitrogen on the y. The top set of 10 panels is 2020, the pre-fire lakes, and then the bottom set of panels is post-fire with, the same lake being on top of each other for comparison's sake. And so in some of them, just visually, you can kind of tell, and the numbers are suggesting this too, that sometimes the food web did truncate and shrink, especially like say you can see that with Trail Lake, which is the third from the last, that the food web got smaller. So that was the most visually obvious to see. And so the food web has changed, but also something to note is the food web's amount of space that it's taking up may or may not have changed a lot lake to lake, but where those food web components, the fish, the aquatic insects, the zooplankton, where they are in space also matters. And that's something that we also want to look into, because while connecting the points around the edges of that plot looks like a food web size might look the same, there might be more emphasis on the left side or the right side. And that's saying that the reliance on carbon is sort of different in the lake. And so that's interesting too. So those are directions that we want to take that question. And we're also open to additional ideas that we can be doing with this data. So to wrap up, we know that the ecological patterns are often scale dependent, especially in all systems and lakes included. And we were really fortunate then to have this size gradient data on lakes beforehand to be able to ask these follow-up questions on fire. And while fire is good on the landscape in general, we're hoping to be able to address what mega-fire disturbances are doing to influence the ecology of lakes, and hope that that information is going to be useful for managers trying to make decisions on what to do in the heat of an active fire that's going through an area that they manage. And so we believe that these results are also going to be widely applicable, both in understanding what's happening regionally to cold water lakes post-fire, but also everything that we're discussing today is increasingly relevant worldwide. And so as megafires events are being more common, then we're hoping to be able to provide more information on that. But again, today's work is especially for the firework, it's a work in progress. And so what I was sharing today was preliminary, and we're open to ideas to expand the project further with the data that we have in hand. But we're also happy to chat about ideas for future work too that could answer like additional questions. So with that, thank you.
That was great.
Thank you.
Yeah, there you go. Jason, find a little icon to share that. Amazing work. My first thought with your with the field work, that photo there is wow, it's a lot of work. And my next thought was, where do I sign up? I'd be happy to be a packer and get to see some of those sites and contribute to the science and all. Is that sort of field work done, or is there more ongoing work like this in other areas that haven't had fire yet? So maybe you're getting some pre, or others that have, or what?
So those are interesting questions. So for the work that was done in Lassen, we have finished doing the post-fire food web collection. We put sensors in the lakes that we're visiting every year to get those data from for temperature and oxygen. And we're also collecting water chemistry data on the lakes too. Some of those things, like for example, the water chemistry just wasn't part of the research objectives in the first study. So we unfortunately don't have all of that for pre-fire. We have some of it. And then, for new work, like I'm really interested in looking at some of these follow-up questions and others that I didn't mention today on what's happening to lakes or streams in mountain areas, in non-mountainous areas. But it's a little bit tricky to plan around, like basically, well, I guess as fires are going through the landscape, it starts to become easier to narrow down where the next fire might be.
Right.
But another option is to figure out where like prescribed fires are happening and see if we can team up with a group that's doing that, perhaps, to be able to do some sampling beforehand and answer some pretty big questions that haven't been asked before. So interested, but no immediate concrete plans.
Yeah, got it. Anybody else, feel free to ask questions. You can just, there's not too many people. You can just sort of take yourself off mute and ask it. Or if you want to, there you go, Brett, raise your hand, go for it. And then others, you can put a message in the chat too if you want. Go ahead, Brett.
Hi, Christine. Nice to meet you. I'm just across the parking lot in Meyer Hall on campus. Nice presentation. So you already somewhat answered my question that water quality wasn't part of like the pre-sampling, but that's immediately what I thought about. And I was wondering, one thing that we've seen, like you talked about lots of processes that I'm interested in, which is like redox dynamics in lakes and how wildfires can affect that. Have you thought about whether you could use sulfur isotopes to inform on that, or thought about it? Just because they do fractionate, and generally when like fish are in certain habitats where there's a lot of sulfate reduction, you see it in the 34S signature. And so I don't know if it would be just an idea where, we think that wildfire will liberate a lot of sulfur from soils and it would run off into these lakes. It may, provide another indicator of some of the processes happening prior to food web uptake.
That's a good question. I hadn't really thought about sulfur isotopes in a long time. I know some folks who are doing that work in like floodplains out in the in the Central Valley, but they're expecting the foodscape to be very different, and so in a mountain lake it hadn't been, and so that's not really something that had crossed my mind before. Do you know whether like what sort of, is it still dry tissue that goes into that process, or would we have already needed to do, because we still have samples in the freezers that if we don't think we need them, we might get rid of them, but they might be in a state that could be used.
It's just the same you just like check a different box from the isotope facility on campus.
Wonderful.
So it is a separate analysis, but
yeah,
I don't know if it's useful for your work, but if you wanted to chat about it, we could think about, how you might apply it. We're thinking about, because I have a small project looking at how sulfur in soils could be liberated. A lot of the sulfur is stored as organic sulfur, and then it will come off, and if that makes it into the lake, it could change the redox dynamics in the lake.
Yeah, that's a really good point.
All right. So yeah, you guys can find each other through the UCD
yes
networks and all.
Yes.
I see Jay Davis. You'd raise your hand. Go ahead.
Yeah, nice work and presentation. You mentioned fish stocking, and I don't know a lot about it, but I know that there's a lot of it that goes on. I'm wondering if there was any stocking between 2020 and 22 in these lakes and how that might confound your results.
Excellent question, and yes, to all of it. So they're like I had mentioned, there was stalking happening the year after the fire, and Paul from CDFW was helping us get to the lakes just in time before they got stalked. So some things like the like rainbow trout total length and things might be confounded by stalking, and we can't really know. I would think that they stalk fry though, and I don't not a fishy enough person to know, but I'm certain that like if we had large trout in the lake, then they were probably there persisting for a little bit, but they don't overall persist in those lakes very well. In those areas, we were able to find trout that were, I want to say like over a foot, close to a foot and a half, like really big fish.
Wow.
In the lakes, especially like in 2020. And so we were finding smaller ones later, but yes, it's a good point that might be confounding those results, and so that's definitely something that I'm going to poke a little bit more into, at least what the chances are, because I know they backpack, not backpack, they take pack mules or horses and stock fry in those lakes that way.
Mm.
In the case of Chitoveran Lake, it's actually next to the road, and they just take a truck and dump fish in there, sometimes more than once summer, which I found out the hard way because we, because those fish are coming from a hatchery, their diet is different at the hatchery than in the lake, and so that has affected like making sure that we at least like if that happened before we were able to get out there, in 2020 when we did that, then we had to wait a month at least for the diet of that lake, the system that they were in, to integrate into their tissues. And then that same lake was stocked a little bit prematurely post fire, and then when we were actually sampling it later for fish, we had gill nets in the water, and a truck backed up to the lake while we were in the boat. Actually, the picture that you're seeing on the bottom, if you can still see my screen, that bottom one, that's fish that were being stocked in the lake while we had nets in there, and so we were just pulling them out really quickly so that we didn't get those new fish in the lake. And so there's a student who was on her first day in the field ever and has a big fishy net in her lap, and she couldn't be happier.
Something that may be of interest to you, for many years I was leading the statewide fish mercury monitoring. There's mercury and other contaminants, but mainly mercury. And we sampled the mercury results are what I want to talk about. Sampled a lot, hundreds of lakes across the state, including a lot of lakes at higher elevations with trout, and the rainbow trout from most of the vast majority of the lakes, of those lakes, had very low mercury concentrations, which is good news for fish consumers. But where there's cases where the fish are like resident breeding populations, then you see kind of what you would expect from a real food web where the trout are really connected to the food web and accumulating the mercury from the food web. So there's a lot of mercury data suggesting that the trout aren't well connected to the aquatic food webs with their low mercury concentration. So I've long been puzzling about that. Might be of interest to you.
Yeah.
Jay, maybe you can put in the chat the the link to that study and the data set and all.
Sure.
That'd be great.
Oh, there you go.
Anna was co-lead of the state bioaccumulation monitoring in the last few years. She's all over the links.
Yeah, there you go. Thanks. Other questions? I got a bunch. I could ask questions for hours. This is cool stuff. One question I'll ask is sort of management implications. Recognizing some of these are remote, no one goes out and does anything except planting the fish, I suppose. But I guess in terms of management implications, there's two things that come to mind post-fire. Should they continue stocking, period? I mean, it's not naturally part of the system anyway, right? And then the other is there anything they should do to the watershed or around the lake in terms of restoration that would be better or worse for the fisheries and the lake ecology based on this work?
Yeah, those are all good questions. So like most of these lakes in this particular basin, in this particular area of the 10, one or two of them might have self-sustaining trout populations. A lot of the other ones, they might be good for a few years, but it seems like they might not be. And then like I mentioned earlier, it might be that a couple are persisting and then they get really big. And so that's interesting. I'm not really sure what about this area yet is kind of causing that versus other sites that I'd visited of the 36 total, where sometimes we were at a lake. I had worked in the John Muir Wilderness in southern Sierra Nevada, where there are golden trout in those lakes, and they're self-sustaining now. And so I'm not really sure what that causes that difference, because the habitat's definitely more bare and higher elevation up there. I know that the area is now, like, especially after the fire, I think because it's a wilderness, a lot of the logging is happening outside of the wilderness and not as much is happening within it, except for to clear any hazards for hikers, because there's a good number of like nice trails going around these lakes, and it's not hard to get to these particular ones. And then some of them, like I was showing some photos, everything is just totally charred around. So I guess I'm not sure if the right answer is knowing what the native species were there before and trying to help it out a little bit, or hoping that just letting it take its course and having those come back. But there is some, as I've been going every year since the fire, there is some some understories, some small trees that are starting. So the succession process has started. Yeah, but these are good questions. I'm hoping to get a little bit more answers soon.
Other questions?
Hi, Christine. I'm Pat Maloney. I work at the Turlock Irrigation District on Don Pedro Reservoir, Tuolumne River. In 2013, we had the Rim Fire, one of the top 5 fires in the state. We noticed anecdotally a decrease in our shad population and then subsequent crash of the bass and seemingly trout populations. And most recently, 2022, we started to see more shad again. And now the bass and trout populations and their size has definitely increased. So to me, it's almost a 10-year period where the populations of the larger fish really declined, and the response took quite a while. So I would encourage you to roll this on to somebody else following you behind to study those same lakes on a long-term basis. And most of what we're seeing is anecdotal. I'm tasked out with working on the salmon below the reservoir most of the time. So a lot of observations from people working on the reservoir, as well as a lot of bass and trout fishermen that I speak with and work with frequently.
Yeah, those are good points. I like, for one, like, fire can definitely be good on the landscape, and so we're not totally sure. Like we had made some assumptions that at least in certain size lakes, like there might be a more detrimental effect, but like we saw fish persisted, and we did see some positive fish growth in some of the lakes, and those weren't even all the data that were analyzed yet. So I think that like what your observations are consistent with things that I've heard too, where something about that system, it maybe was negative to the system initially, but over a longer period of time actually has a positive effect, because fire and some of these organisms did, are connected on our landscapes. And yeah, I would love to continue working on these lakes. We're trying to figure out if there's any way to continue to fund the work. The NSF Rapid helps you get some funding to be able to get out there quickly, but it's not a lot. It's only for like a year or two. And so everything that we've been doing since the first year and a half has kind of just been a side project of mine while I did my dissertation, because this was not part of my dissertation at all. And so now I'm a postdoc still at Davis and still hoping to see if I can have continue looking at this, because what I think is really interesting is we know a lot about how like terrestrial vegetation and forest succession might happen, like happens after a fire, but I think that there's a lot less of that for aquatic systems. And so if you did see some species blink out, like the ones you were describing, how long does it take for that to reform, and for how do those food web like linkages connect to each other and change in that 10-year time period? And there has been at least 1 or 2 studies on streams with pre and post fire data that that did show it took like 10 years for the system to start looking and behaving the way that it used to. So yeah, all good points and backed up by a little bit of science, a little bit of observations and stuff.
Yeah. That's yeah, maybe what the Patrick was mentioning, this sort of anecdotal stuff. You know, Fish and Wildlife does creel surveys. I wonder if there's any sort of questions or whatever that could be added to their surveys that would be useful for this. So less you know, scientific, I suppose, than your what's the term, the catch per effort or something. Similar sort of thing for, you know, how much are people catching in a lake, and you can at least see a big difference like that in what they're catching.
Yeah, that's a good point.
So that'd be, you know, because they survey the whole state, so you could, you know, do some sort of spatial analysis with or without fire in their watersheds and that kind of thing.
That's a really good point. I wrote that down.
Yeah, all right. And you see in the comments too, Anne's got a link to the work, and Jay had some follow up on it. So
Oh, great.
I got something there. Great.
From
Other
a lake
questions?
manager perspective, I'm wondering if you could jumpstart and shorten that time, that 10-year time period, say by reintroducing populations of shad to get things back going quicker, to satisfy your pro bass tournaments, which we have 90 a year on Don
Yeah.
Pedro. 2 million acre feet of water. It's huge. So there are a lot of people very interested in fishing. 1 out of 3 days of the year, we're having a tournament.
Absolutely.
Wow. Yeah, and those are reservoirs, right? So they're a little more
Yes.
manageable than the high mountain Sierra lakes that Christine was surveying there. So yeah, more opportunities to do stuff. And a question: so the Chad, those are like trophic level 3. So the bigger fish are eating them. Is that what you're saying? That
That's correct. Yeah, they're the largest food source, maybe other than crayfish, crawdad.
And Christine, what is the only thing stocked? The predator fish, you know, certainly the small ones, but the other fish that they're consuming, those are naturally there, or what?
Not naturally. So the speckled dace, I believe, like they're in the Sierra Nevada lakes, whether they're, you know, they have also been used, I think, as a bait fish. And so they could easily also be in some of these lakes because of that. But they are naturally in like mountain lakes too. Tui chub could be there naturally as well. Brown bullhead catfish, I think, used to be stocked a long time ago, that it's not even on necessarily all of the records. And so that's an odd one, because the lakes that they're in are still high elevation, but they're much smaller, a little bit more shallow. And so like they tend to prefer warmer water. So it's a little odd to find them there. And then so rainbow trout's the main one that's still being stocked actively. But there are kind of things that I've been told are like not really well tracked as to what was happening, you know, a few decades ago.
Yeah. Yeah, interesting. A lot of ways to get introduced, not just by Fish and Wildlife.
Right.
Yeah. All right. Other questions? I get a couple of things. I was saying this is the last webinar of this schedule, but I'm going to follow up with the other folks on the webinar committee and see if we can put another one out for next month. And Christine, you're welcome to share, you know, with me or others with columns, the papers that come out of this, and then we'll share a link to them and stuff for all the members.
Absolutely, gladly. Yeah. Hopefully within like the next year, we'll have a lot more of this work finished and worked up and things. And yeah, I'd love to share that with columns.
Yeah, and everybody could find on the California Water blog someday too.
Yeah.
Shout out to that great resource. Yeah,
Thank you.
I have to tell people when I kept seeing Christine's name with the water blog, I'm like, wow, this lady's amazing. She's such a wealth of information. And it turns out she was just editing them. She wasn't writing like the legal stuff and the fish and the water
I can do it
quality.
all.
Yeah, you did it all. Yeah, edit it all.
Edit it all.
Yeah, yeah. But great job with that. So
Thank you.
you bet. So all right, we're right at 1 o'clock. If there's no more questions, then we'll cut it, and folks can follow up with Christine individually too. You can find her pretty well on the UC Davis website and all. So thanks again, Christine. Appreciate the
Great.
time and
Thanks.
great work.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye. Let's see.